Across the globe, no matter where they are, people of African descent have historically faced varying forms of oppression, discrimination, and marginalization. This is a reality that has been deeply embedded in the global landscape for centuries, and some scholars have dedicated their work to understanding why African people, regardless of location, have been consistently perceived in this way. In this video, we'll explore some of the reasons that may help explain why this has happened and how it has influenced our world today. Before we get started, I want to thank you for supporting this channel. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share our videos. Drop comment on your reviews. TO helps us keep creating these videos and providing deeper insights into African history, culture, and identity. Now, let me make one thing clear. This video is my own perspective, based on the analysis of historical patterns. There's no simple answer to this question of why African people have been perceived as a threat in many parts of the world. But today I'm going to explore some ideas that might shed light on the situation. This isn't an appeal for sympathy, nor is it an attempt to make anyone feel guilty. It's just an exploration of why the world is the way it is, based on historical observations. We're going to start by taking a step back and looking at how ancient perceptions of Africa and its people have shaped current narratives. Many of the earliest records of African civilizations came from Greek and Roman historians. Though their accounts may be flawed or exaggerated, they painted a picture of Africa that was largely focused on its people and cultures as being the foundation of human civilization. Herodotus, often regarded as the father of history, even described the people of Africa, specifically the Ethiopians, as the first humans. Interestingly, many of these ancient historians viewed Africa not as a land of savages, as later European narratives would suggest, but as the birthplace of civilization. These early records acknowledged Africa's immense contributions to human development, suggesting that African societies were among the first to establish complex institutions and cultural traditions. While these ideas may not have been universally accepted at the time, they planted the seed for a different kind of understanding of African peoples and their civilizations. Now, fast forward to the 18th century, and scholars like Constantin de Volney, a French historian, echoed similar thoughts. He proposed that the ancient African civilizations were the cradle of knowledge and science, which made African people, and by extension, Africans today, inseparably tied to the origin of humanity. This was a bold statement that ran counter to the prevailing views of Europe at the time, but it highlighted the unique status of Africa in world history. So, what does this historical context tell us about why African people might have been seen as a threat? First, if African people were indeed the first to establish civilizations, then they held a kind of original power, an ancestral claim to human history that few could challenge. This concept of firstness had an undeniable weight, and it may have made people from other parts of the world, particularly European colonizers, feel insecure. Their fear was not just about the physical presence of Africans, but about the deeper, more primal power that Africa and its people represented. Let's build on that by looking at another psychological factor, something often called genetic fear. As strange as it may sound, the idea of racial purity has been a significant force throughout history. If Africans were seen as the first humans, then the notion of mixing or tainting other racial groups with African blood was deeply unsettling for some. This wasn't just about racial identity. It was about the fear that the mixing of races could lead to what they called genetic dilution or genetic annihilation. This belief gave rise to the concept of racial purity, which justified the separation, subjugation, and exploitation of African people. Interestingly, this fear was not universally applied across all European or Arab societies. For instance, in Spain and Portugal, there was a more fluid approach to racial integration. African slaves in Latin America often intermarried with European colonizers, leading to the creation of new racial identities. Yet, even in these contexts, there were still strong social and political barriers in place to keep these populations from gaining full power. In the Arab world, a similar dynamic played out. Many enslaved Africans in the Arab world had children who were recognized as part of Arab society, but their African heritage was often downplayed or suppressed. In some cases, the integration of Africans into Arab culture helped to ease the discomfort of genetic fears, as the Arab identity often became more central to how these individuals identified. The dynamics of race and genetics, however, were particularly problematic for European powers who viewed African people as both a threat to their racial superiority and as a valuable commodity to exploit. This sense of threat from African peoples didn't end with the end of slavery. It morphed into economic and political strategies aimed at preventing the consolidation of African power. Now, let's talk about Africa's resources, which also played a major role in why African people were viewed as a threat. Africa has always been home to vast wealth, gold, diamonds, oil, and more, resources that have made the continent an attractive target for conquest and colonization. Ancient travelers to Africa, like those from the Arab world, noted the vast wealth of kingdoms like Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. These empires controlled some of the richest trade routes and gold mines in the world. For centuries, African empires had built their wealth on these resources, and their political power was tied to their control over these materials. This wealth was a double-edged sword. It made African kingdoms rich and powerful, but it also made them prime targets for external powers. In modern history, this pattern continued. European colonial powers were drawn to Africa's vast resources, and they did everything in their power to control them. The European imperial project was driven, in part, by the desire to access Africa's wealth and resources. This fear of African economic and political power, tied to the continent's natural resources, is one of the reasons why colonial powers worked so hard to keep African people marginalized and under control. If Africans were allowed to consolidate their resources and power, they could challenge European and Arab dominance. In conclusion, there are several interconnected reasons why African people have historically been viewed as a threat. 1. The historical recognition of Africa as the birthplace of humanity and civilization gave African people a unique power that others feared could challenge their own claims to human history. 2. The fear of racial mixing and the idea of genetic annihilation created a psychological and ideological barrier to African integration and empowerment. 3. Africa's vast wealth and resources made the continent a prime target for external powers, and this fear of African economic strength led to continuous efforts to prevent African people from consolidating power. These historical dynamics continue to shape the way African people are perceived today, both on the continent and in the diaspora. The legacy of colonization, combined with racial anxieties and the exploitation of African resources, has contributed to the ongoing struggles for African empowerment. This is just my personal analysis of historical patterns, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback. Let's continue the conversation in the comments below. If you appreciate the content and would like to support the continued creation of these videos, you can do so by liking and subscribing to this channel and all our social media handles. The link is in the description box below. Remember, know your history, honor your ancestors, and continue to push forward for justice. Thanks for watching.